Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today in this overcast day in June, at least where we are in Hamilton. Today you will hear a presentation from Rob McCann. Rob McCann is the founder of Clearcable Communications and the president at the Hamilton Tech Center. He's the chief strategist at Clearcable. Clearcable is a company you might not know by name, but you probably experience many times in your daily life. You just don't know it. They build broadband infrastructure around North America for clients, including smart mobility and smart city environments. So without any further ado, I will hand the stage to Rob, so he can tell us about building better broadband for communities of all sizes. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much, Richard, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I hope to make good use of your time, and we'll be glad to answer any questions along the way as we go. We're really going to talk about municipal scale infrastructure today, and I wanted to start by pointing out why we think this discussion will be helpful. And that's because Clearcable has really been building better broadband for communities of all sizes for 17 years. And what I mean by that is that we support service providers and communities, and we bring to them the knowledge and expertise that's necessary to be able to build out and operate networks. And that operating component is of great importance. We bring broad insight into diverse networks and expertise in broadband. And most importantly, we've spent since 2015 a considerable amount of time looking specifically at intelligent communities and how the implementation of broadband transitions away from simply being a means to communicate, but instead being a means to connect things together in our built environment. So today is really about the intersection of the built environment with technology and how we deal with it. First, I would like to point out that there's some interesting market shifts that are happening. Cisco estimates that by 2023, two-thirds of the world will have internet access above 100 megabits per second, while at the same time we observe that the consumption of broadband, the consumption of internet, continues to grow by 35 to 50% compound annual growth rate. So we're seeing more people use the network or use broadband more often. And of course, that's not a big surprise in a day when we see a pandemic. But this was true before the pandemic, and it continues to be true now. So we are adopting more broadband all the time. We're also observing that municipalities are starting to build out their networks. They recognize that there are gaps in what's delivered to them by service providers, while at the same time, the big telcos themselves are starting to roll out their 5G infrastructure. And on top of all of that, we see sensor networks start to emerge. And yet these sensor networks don't necessarily all talk to each other. The convergence is still yet to come. But overall, there are more things connected to more places, and they're all working together. So it's becoming vitally important to have municipal scale networks that are be able to service all of those needs at the same time. I'd like to take a little brief case study to show you just how complicated things are. This is the Hamilton Technology Center, which is a 40,000 square foot innovation hub with 22 different companies in it. But inside this building, there are multiple networks. There's a multi-tenant Wi-Fi, and you see a Wi-Fi access point in the top right-hand corner so that people can get access to the internet while they're in the building. But there's also a LoRaWAN network, which is a sensor network that does things like the bottom left-hand here, detects whether there's water leaking in the washrooms. There's a Zigbee building automation system to run all of the HVAC. There's a distributed antenna system to provide better coverage, and you see that picture in the bottom right-hand corner. And then there's also Ethernet. So one simple tiny network or one simple tiny building has all of these different networks to service all of these different purposes. And if we take that scale from just a building scale and roll it up into a larger scale, we may see things like door access detection, temperature and humidity detection, leak detection, power outlets that are controlled, security cameras and safety, and soil detection so we don't overwater the grass. And we take that from that campus kind of environment up again to the city scale. And in cities, we see a wider range of applications and sensors and things that need to talk to each other, ranging everywhere from smart public transit all the way down to public safety and surveillance. So it's clear that the needs of a network for a municipal scale are continuing to grow as we bring together all of these applications in one place. And that's really what we're here to talk about today. I've borrowed this particular slide from BIA Communications, and I think it's a wonderful representation of the complexity of the things that we need to deal with. If you don't know them, they operate the networking inside the TTC subway system. And if you look at this particular picture, you will see that there is closed circuit television. We need to monitor the environment for public safety. But there's also digital screens to be able to present information to people. And there's environmental monitoring to make sure that the air quality is safe for people to be there, as well as help kiosks or places where people can seek more information, and smart ticketing to keep track of who's getting on and off the subway, as well as the ability to expand the cellular network so that people can still continue to use their smartphone. There's lots more in here. I think that you get the point that it's a very complicated set of applications that need to be able to share and communicate together. Now, if we took all of those things and jammed them into one particular application, well, this is a really great example from the Booth School of Engineering, McMaster, trying to put all of the bits and pieces, all the different sensors onto one piece of infrastructure. And this really is the current state of smart city technology. And you see that it's not necessarily aesthetically pleasing. In fact, if we look at the CITM current state, in order to get all of the functionality that we need to be able to put all sorts of different things on pole infrastructure. And this is really the challenge that we need to be able to solve if smart city is going to really continue to evolve on the municipal scale. And that's what we're talking about today. How can we possibly connect all of these particular devices all across a large, wide area? And there are several things that we can consider when we want to do that. And the first one is to establish partnerships. And those partnerships would be with traditional network operators or telecommunications companies, but using that partnership to ensure that the local requirements are also going to be met and that there's the ability to connect multiple things. There's also the ability for perhaps a municipality to enter direct competitively in the market, and they could become a full service municipal network that not only provides access to telcos and other carriers, but perhaps to end users or to sensor networks or to all sorts of other things that they need to cover. And then there is another model where you can enter as a public telecom infrastructure. In other words, building some infrastructure that then gets leased out to network operators who are able to operate on that your behalf. And then finally, building an open access network. And an open access network is really a network that everybody has the opportunity on fair terms to be able to purchase or lease access to the facilities. And these can be all done either in the public domain or in the private domain. But let's look at a couple of examples from our experience. One of my favorite networks is the one in Stratford, Ontario. It's Rhizome Networks. Very visionary in 2010 to set out and use a smart meter project, so a project to be able to read the power meters, but leverage that to build out an entire hybrid fiber Wi-Fi mesh network across the entire city. This affords them the opportunity to offer some free public Wi-Fi in the places where they want to, but also was the economic driver to lead their digital transition. In other words, they became the connected community. And to do that, they brought along some private sector partners. So this network today is built and it exists, but is leveraged and operated by two of the local telecom operators to be able to deliver services to the folks in the city. So it's a partnership to really be able to deliver service. We also see locally a couple of other companies in Sarnia, the Blue Water Regional Network, and in Newmarket, the Envy Network. These are real municipally owned carriers, a direct competitive entry, meaning that they have built out to be a network service provider. And it's purpose-built to serve the needs of the community with a full range of services that you might see. And these can be sometimes competitive in nature, like these are, or they could be cooperative. They have the opportunity to work together with extra carriers. But the idea here is that the community-owned entity is building out a network that is able to be used for not only delivering broadband, but also delivering the infrastructure that the city requires, and eventually being able to deliver connectivity to things like sensor networks. Another of my favorite is Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. In Shrewsbury, they built out the power infrastructure in 1908, and they decided to get into cable television as a town in 1983 and launched their own ISP in 1999, and then finally telephone in 2006. So if you move to Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, you acquire all of the services you need directly from the town itself. And since 1912, Selco has returned money back to the community. So this is an example of a direct competitive entry of a town into being able to build out a network that meets the needs of that town, but still be able to do that in a way that returns funds to the town itself. Aside from actually getting into direct competitive entry, some things that can help deployment are the ability to deploy public telecom infrastructure. And I like this example from Parkland County, Alberta, where they really only have 13 people per square kilometer, but they have to cover 2,400 square kilometers. So imagine trying to entice private investment to come and build a network in this community that's going to be able to service their needs. It's virtually impossible. So in this particular case, the county took upon itself to build out a tower infrastructure and connect those towers together with fiber, and then lease those towers or access to those towers out to the private sector and other needs that the community had to be able to deliver services to the community. So now today they've been so successful that they're continuing to build out fiber infrastructure from that tower base. And this is the notion of actually putting something in the ground or on the ground that can then be leveraged by somebody else, not actively becoming a service provider, not doing a direct competitive entry, but putting in the things that de-risk private industry and enable technology to move forward. And then the last, and perhaps my most favorite, is the notion of an open access network. And this here is Ado Kweldum, and he is the general manager of Kaihatawag in the Netherlands. And in this particular community, they realized that there were telcos running services, there were cable cos running services, there were startup broadband companies trying to run services, and all of them wanted to dig up the street, and all of them wanted to do something different. But instead, they took it upon themselves to decide that they would build the base infrastructure. In other words, they recognized that what went in the ground was just as important as the roads themselves or the power infrastructure. And they chose to do that and then make that network available on an open access basis to the providers. And it looks somewhat like this. In the traditional OSI layering model, layer one is the physical infrastructure that actually goes into the ground. So that's the fiber that goes from the central location to the customer's homes. And then layer two is the active equipment, or the stuff that we connect to that fiber in order to move bits from one end to the other. And then on top of that is layer three, or the access to the internet, the stuff that gets you outside of the community. And you can see here that there are internet service providers who provide those connections to the internet, but there is some services in between that are connecting from the central location to the customer's home. And then there's the fiber itself. And if we draw it out, we have the telecom operators up here, most of them playing at layer 3, but some of them also being involved in layer 2. But you also have the open access network that is being involved in layer 2, but most importantly, owning the common infrastructure on the ground. So they own it and they maintain it. And then through this common single infrastructure, everybody has the opportunity to deliver services to the homes, to the sensors, to the cars, to the devices that are necessary out in the field. And really, open access network is about building a common infrastructure, and this is how we can easily scale municipal applications. That brings up the opportunity to talk about community networks or community-owned networks. And this is not something that's new, but is just now returning back into vogue. In other words, municipalities or communities or counties are starting to have an interest in actually owning the physical assets. Like I said earlier, broadband infrastructure is infrastructure just like roads, water, and power. And cities and counties and communities are good at managing infrastructure. So it starts to make sense for the municipalities to have some role. And in a community network, the community owns the infrastructure, or an arm's length company, for instance, a power utility that may be owned by the community, would then go off and deploy the broadband network. And that's exactly what happened in my Sarnia example and my Newmarket example. These networks are focused on the needs of the community. So in other words, they have small boundaries and they're trying to solve the problem of what is necessarily locally. And they're often driven by the economic good with long amortization rather than worrying about return. Of course, like the Shrewsbury case, they do actually return to the community, but in this case, this is not the objective. And it makes for the opportunity to build a consistent common infrastructure, technology for all the purposes that are necessary for the city. And of course, the benefits of doing this are that it creates another revenue stream for the municipality. It brings out broader economic good versus just simple economic profit, and provides that baseline. It gives us the network to be able to connect all the things that need to be connected. And often municipalities will say, this differentiates me. This is an opportunity to attract businesses or residents to my community. And when I do that, that value that's generated locally stays locally. It gives them that opportunity to address the specific gaps in their own telecommunication requirements, and most importantly, control over that experience or over that infrastructure. So to do this, though, they really need to look, whether it is a private sector or a public sector like a municipality, they really need to look at how to build out that strategy. And it really takes a considerable amount of time to do it, because first they need to look at the scope. What is this geography that I'm looking at that I'm trying to solve the problem for? Where are the key sites? So how is the population distributed? And when they know that, they can assess, where does this infrastructure need to be, and what type of technologies do I need to support? What departments does this impact in a municipality? Or more importantly, which departments can this assist? How can we connect things better together for our intelligent community? And then we can verify what's actually there today. There could be a substantial amount of municipal assets that are available for consumption or for use in this, or there could be some private sector assets that are interesting and useful. Who could be the partners that could help pull all of this together? And when we have that in mind, we can engage the citizens and the private sector carriers and the counselors to build the strategy around what is important to a particular community or a particular municipal network. And finally, design that network, building out the logical diagrams, the maps, and the requirements, and then creating that formalized recommendation that can be signed off or can be built or can be constructed, regardless of who it is. And this is really the approach to how to build this better broadband strategy. Now, as you leave from the event today or from this discussion, the question you most certainly have is, well, how do we get started, whether we're a private sector or a public sector, on figuring out how we can service this intelligent community market? And these are really the 5 questions that you need to be thinking about. What is the desired outcome? What is it we're trying to produce by building this municipal scale broadband infrastructure? Is it really public good? Is it economic development? Is it lower costs? And when we know what the desired outcome is, we need to figure out what's already in place. What is the current digital infrastructure? What's currently deployed, taking that inventory and being able to figure out the gaps in the current local community. When we know that part, we can figure out who are the anchor tenants. Who's actually going to use this? Is this specifically being built for smart IoT? Is it delivering stuff to residents or to the schools and hospitals or commercial clients? And with the tenants, then we can figure out what services are necessary. What does this network need to be able to deliver for us to be able to be useful? And finally, what are the roadblocks? And this is a very, very important question to ask, because more often than not, municipal policies and processes and permitting has not quite caught up to where the technology is today or where the technology could go. So it really takes a deep introspective look at how can we make it easier to deploy infrastructure in a safe and reliable manner on a municipal scale, and what types of things are going to need to change. Because one thing is for sure, the number of 5G access points, the number of smart IoT devices, the amount of fiber that needs to be deployed across large geographic, rural, and urban markets is absolutely tremendous. And it's going to stretch our abilities to be able to get that appropriate permitting in place. So looking at these 5 questions will help start a planning process, because we want to take this network that we have today, the current state of technology that everybody has to deal with, and transition that into something that is far more aesthetically pleasing. And so here's some really great examples. On the far right-hand side there, you see a smart pole, and up at the top is the antennas for the 5G network, and it's in the bottom is where the radios go. So it's very sleek, but it also can have controllable smart lighting, smart and connected lighting, and other types of technologies. You see there the billboard, basically, or the kiosk where people can come up and get services or find out information. And then the smaller smart and connected lighting pole, which can host cameras and Wi-Fi's and all sorts of other different technologies in a fashion that is unintrusive. So that's some great examples from Signify. And if we move into the middle, we see SmartCone, who will have a presentation at CITM coming up in the future, where you can put this type of technology in very small places that are usable in different applications. And then as we move to the left, you see Big Belly and Ericsson with their presentations of the smart and connected garbage can, as well as a smart and connected bus stop, which is able to give you information about the bus, but also be a central location for connectivity to Wi-Fi or other types of smart sensors. And of course, this is a very, very small subset of potential applications, but it really draws the distinction between going from a place where we have lots of bits and pieces all packed together and putting them into a place where they are part of the infrastructure, where they're hidden. Now, of course, every one of these things on this screen has to be connected together. So we need to be able to get the network, whether that's a fiber network, or it's a LoRaWAN network, or it's a 5G network, or it's a Wi-Fi network, or it's some other kind of network. We need to be able to ensure that we're building it in a fashion that is able to connect all these devices. So the key takeaways for this session really are that businesses and communities are going to rely on this connectivity. It's not just about delivering internet to the homes anymore for entertainment or for work from home, but it is about connecting all of the things together that are necessary to improve our daily lives. And that really means that developers, particularly developers of new subdivisions, are going to need to think long term about the network needs. We're going to have new sensors in places that need to be connected. More things will connect to the network, and that's going to be part of the infrastructure that we build out. More things are going to be mounted to the physical spaces. So not only do we have to figure out how to mount them to the physical spaces, but figure out how to put them there in a fashion that's unintrusive and that is aesthetically pleasing. These things have to be aesthetically pleasing. And on top of all of this, the contractors themselves who build out communities or who build out public infrastructure are going to need to have new skill sets to understand how networking works and how these things connect together. We have a shortage of contractors in this particular field today. And probably the most important one, though, is that planners, whether they are municipal planners or they're just technology planners for a private company, need to have some vision. They need to think about the new technology and the new policies and how we package all of that together to be able to deliver one network on scale that's manageable and can connect all of the things that we need to connect. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today, so thank you. I'll open the floor to questions, and I've also posted my email address in case there's any follow-up afterwards. Greta, do we have any questions?
We don't have any questions yet, but I'm just giving everyone permission to speak, or you can always type a question into the Q&A.
Thanks, Rob. Actually, I have a question. So I understand the concept of needing to partner to get this done and players and participate. Can you elaborate a little bit more maybe on the monetization of, so you have to spend billions to deploy assets, right? What are the monetization opportunities for a municipality if they're contemplating things like this? How does Shrewsbury make money? Since 1908.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and Shrewsbury really is a very special case. And the reason why they're successful is they're delivering services to the entire community. And like I said, it is the full suite of services: internet, telephone, cable TV. They are effectively a carrier at that particular point. But even if a municipality is not prepared to take that step, because many aren't, many just don't have the machinery to be a service provider, but they are very good at being infrastructure builders and infrastructure managers. So in that case, it can be as simple as being able to make the policies appropriate to make it easy to deploy a network, and being able to put in some sort of infrastructure which then can be leased to the people who can use it. And that's where the monetization comes into play. If I flip back to the Stratford example, if I have a substantial network and I have some telecoms that are interested in using that network in order to get to places that they might not have built to on their own, and or to be able to get directly to end users, then I can lease that capacity to them in a way that they sort of rev share back, or in other words, I'm able to get some revenue for the network that I've put in place today. And you also have to think not only in terms of I'm just leasing out this network, but what are the other things that it's enabling you to do that drive savings? And in that particular case, we talked about reading the power meters with smart meter reading. So that's an application that actually drives value for the city. And similarly, you may choose to do things with the traffic lighting system, or with the sensing of water in certain areas. So it's really more about finding the applications that drive the savings and finding some of the things that create some revenue.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. We have a question from the audience.
I do have a question here. Is the most cost-effective approach for typical municipalities to retrofit existing hardware or install brand new to improve connectivity? Cost and downtime is likely a barrier to adopting. So which is better, considering those factors?
Sure. So the first thing I would like to point out is that if a municipality is choosing to approach this network construction. They need to free themselves of the shackles of an IT network. We're not talking about an IT network here that supports your employees, that has a certain amount of security and firewalls and all of those sorts of things. What we're talking about here is a service provider infrastructure. So it's an open, more open network. It's more built for service provider applications. It's connecting devices. It's doing things a little bit differently than traditional IT. So if you're thinking about, I have this IT network and should I reuse it? The answer is no, you shouldn't reuse it. You should build this specifically for this purpose. If you do have a network that's built specifically for this purpose, then there's no reason why you can't leverage the things that you have already today. And determining what the most cost effective is really going to depend a lot on the individual community itself. Is this is this already a fairly advanced community that has a significant amount of assets in the ground, or is this something where there's some bits and pieces that were put together in the past? And really pulling back and looking at that broad strategy, like that slide that I pointed out, is probably the best way to drive that. Additionally, the costs for each community are going to depend largely on the geography and the applications that are necessary. So in some places, it's absolutely impossible to dig along the side of the road and put, say, fiber assets in there because there's too much rock. In other places, you may not want to put it all up on poles because maybe the cost is too high, or maybe there's some inherent danger in it being aerial-based infrastructure. So, it really depends on a case-by-case basis on the community that's being served.
I have another question. So are there, from your perspective, what are the key regulatory, I won't say barriers, I'll say enablers, right, that need to be accelerated in order to enable municipalities, right, to think of this, right? And as a corollary to that, at what size of municipality does this start to make sense?
Sure. So let me deal with them backwards. So every community can benefit from increasing their broadband infrastructure. Whether they do that entirely on their own or they do that by engaging someone who already has the machinery is really the question. And it doesn't really matter based on size. Small community of 300 homes may have needs that need to be met, and they could certainly do that. Whereas larger, 7,000, 10,000, 20,000, 500,000 could also do exactly the same thing. So I wouldn't hang my hat strictly on size as much as I would basic community requirements and current gaps in infrastructure and service. And when it comes down to what kind of regulatory levers can we pull in order to help things, we're frequently telling municipalities that it's very important to make it easy for broadband infrastructure to be deployed. And that means that you need to be able to have a dialogue with the folks who are intending to build. And that could be an internal municipal department that is going to build this infrastructure. It could be an arm's length partner like a local power distribution company. It could be a competitive telco that happens to service your area today that you want them to build out this infrastructure so that you can connect everything together. But a lot of that depends on having a good dialogue with those potential service providers and being able to have processes that allow for permitting to happen. Certainly, there's a need from a municipal perspective to be able to look at the safety and the reliability and the longevity of what's being proposed, and having sufficient documentation and ensuring that it's not affecting any other infrastructure. But being able to have that sort of concierge experience, to be able to walk potential investors or departments through what's going to be necessary to simplify this network deployment is probably the single most important thing. An open for business kind of approach, being able to look with scrutiny at current processes and be able to find ways to streamline those and make it easier to get that infrastructure in the ground is the number one important element.
Any other questions, Greta, from the audience?
Not yet, but if anyone does have a question, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or else type it in the Q&A.
Rob, in terms of people that are municipalities that are doing this, so if the use cases are service driven, like I know in the city of Hamilton, I think there are 74 independent lines of service that they have to deliver to the citizenship of Hamilton. And each of those has its own cost model. But are you seeing that in the rationale for making this kind of investment are people using this as an economic development driver as opposed to a delivery and cost optimization? Like, is it a tool that municipalities are moving to, right, to drive economic development?
Yeah, so I think, my overarching message for today really is that we need to be looking at this not necessarily as a service delivery, but as an infrastructure to enable all of the great things that we're going to do in the future. You're right, though, that up until very recently, communities who headed down this route looked at it specifically as a driver for economics. Right? So they wanted to be able to attract new residents, attract new businesses. They wanted to be able to be a connected community. They wanted to be able to deliver better services to their constituents. And again, they could do this directly themselves, or they could do it in partnership with an existing service provider. But that was the goal. For much of now, that still is the goal. But I am imploring people to think about that nature of that complex network that's going to need to be more than delivering services to the end users, that's delivering the connectivity that puts our whole intelligent community together.
Excellent, thanks. Greta, do you see any further questions?
I do not. Looks like we may have solved all of the world's problems already.
There you go. It was such a comprehensive solution. I see
exactly.
Cyrus is on the line. He's going to take this back and just implement it all in Hamilton by Thursday. So with that, Rob, I will say thank you for this. If you do have any further questions, you have Rob's email on the screen here. Right, or my email is available on the CITM website. So I invite you all to table questions after the fact, if you have those. And I will take the opportunity. So I know we've been recording this. Rob has said that we are free to share the content. So you will see the presentation after, and the webinar will make its way to the CITM website eventually. I want to say thank you again, Rob. And I think we might let 6 months or 8 months pass and let some time go by, because I know there are some projects underway that we're both working on, and maybe we can talk about some specific local applications as well as Shrewsbury, Massachusetts.
That would be great. Yeah,
it would be great. So everyone, thank you very much for attending. I will give you back 15 minutes of your day. Please feel free to check out the CITM website at citm.ca. Or again, if you have questions for Rob. Thanks very much, Rob.
Thank you.